1, 2, da di da.
There is one other thing,
da.
Ollie,
Ooh, just bear with me, Debbie.
Seems to be working.
Just bear with me. We're live now.
Hello,
my dear.
Oh,
Look at that. It's all right.
Ooh.
Okay. Oh, yeah. We'll be right with you. Good afternoon, people, and welcome to the Daily Brexit. I think we're a bit late. Funny thing happened on the way to the forum. Yeah, hey, welcome to the Daily Brexit, holding democracy to account. And with us today, Debbie Shaw. Yeah, God bless her. Debbie, on the other end of the line right now, stood for UKIP Braintree Council, is a former personal carer, and a former NHS Trust member. Going to be putting us right on some of the things going wrong with some of our public services in the UK. Including this computer today. That's another story. You know, that's enough of that. Debbie, how are you? Very
well, Ollie. Thank you very much. And hello to everyone listening.
Hey, thanks very much for coming on the show. Thank you. And, yeah, it has been a bit of a flying by the seat of the pants today, I have to tell you. But nonetheless, I still want to go through the papers just very, very briefly. So just bear with me, Debbie, while I quickly do that and have a look, see what's going on. Trump is in Europe, in Poland, and obviously a lot of the papers are talking about that, a lot of the news places, what have you. I can't go through all of Judge's stuff today. But, yeah, we are looking at problems with care homes. According to the Daily Telegraph, a quarter of care homes are unsafe. Well, if you were listening to my chat the other day with Billy Leckie-Howarth, then you know that there's a lot of problems, a lot of worries with our care homes, for example, on a bunch of different levels. Oh, talking of which, the Catholic Church judge-fueled orgy at the Vatican. A dementia time bomb. The phasing out of the petro engine thing, which is kind of cool, I guess. So that's Volvo that are involved there. And the UK's first jihadi jail, they're now separating extremists so that, I don't know, they can become more extreme together in various sections of jails and so on and so forth. Breitbart, Acosta says Trump held fake news conference by attacking CNN in Poland. Just this media war continues. This deep state stroke state war. Trump praises populist Poland, says the West must defend civilization. Obviously, Trump referencing the fact that Poland is, I suppose, the EU would call them relatively populist. I would have just thought that they were looking out for their own country, a little bit like maybe the Hungarians are, for example, as well. Australia would stand by US if North Korea launched a nuclear weapon in its direction, says its deputy PM. Might be a bit late then, I suppose. Very, very very, very bad behavior, Trump vows. Consequences over North Korea missile launch. So that's ramping up nicely, that tension there. Independent, UK suffers sharpest fall in living standards for 6 years. Brexit, the Independent line, no doubt about. The Independent. Oh, hold on. BBC Politics chief named as Theresa May's new head of communications. So she did manage to fill that post. Very good. Grenfell Tower fireproof cladding specified by architects, only used on the ground floor. I've heard some interesting theories about that place this week being used potentially as a sort of a jihadi bomb factory, and that's why it went up like a candle. Obviously, I have no idea the truth of that. But anyway, you know what? Oh yeah, Jeremy Corbyn's ready for an election. Debbie, how are you?
Not too bad, thank you.
The press is just a circus, isn't it? The press, the media, the politicians.
I feel a little bit the press release what they want us to hear and sometimes avoid printing the stuff that we need to see, so it's a little bit of a minefield, isn't it?
How do you get your news? How do you know what to believe?
Research, talking to people. Some things is what I've experienced and seen for myself.
Mm.
You know, sometimes it's a bit like putting a puzzle together as well, unfortunately.
It is, isn't it?
Difficult to trust, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you so much for coming on today. Debbie Shaw, I know that you stood for UKIP as a councillor in Braintree, and I know that you are a personal carer, and that you have been involved in public care as well, and that you used to be on an NHS trust board.
That's right, yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, I mean, there was that headline in today's Buildergraph, as I like to call it, rather than Telegraph, seeing as they seem to follow the Buildergraph agenda. I wanted to ask you about their story. A quarter of care homes being, somehow there being problems with 1 in 4 care homes. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all.
They're talking about elderly people in these care homes. You know, they're unsafe for elderly people. They're talking about in a whole bunch of different ways.
Would I be wrong in making assumptions that we're talking about government-run care homes, or are we talking about both the private and the government ones? I don't want to.
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I'm not sure whether or not that's specified.
Because there is also obviously a difference there. And also depending upon where you live, it's a little bit of a lottery, because the trust did set up spin examples of wonderful settings to give themselves very high scores. But there were
How do they do that?
I suppose by getting what they call independent other government agencies to tick box these examples. The one that stuck in my mind the most was a children's sensory garden for the disabled, which cost £30,000.
A sensory garden?
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, because of certain learning difficulties or abilities even, we have disabled variations, obviously. I don't like to class everyone, but there's different severities. There are people that can't move but can still touch and smell. So there could be light, there could be smell. There's things that engage certain disabled people. And then again, when you've got the able-bodied disabled, if you like, then there are other sensory things as well as engaging things, like keeping chickens and having other abilities within gardens. I'm afraid the background door is my daughter walking through.
All right, okay.
But I felt at the time, when they charged us 30,000, they could have easily have done at least 6 gardens, probably more with that sort of amount of money. But they didn't, and they spun case this one, and I felt strongly that the the job was given to the brother-in-law. So I started to see this, what I now term as the Old Boy Network organisation, or nepotism as I call it in government itself. I could see how it was working, and also how they were doing these improvements at the cost of various other areas and at the cost of other users, if you like, because a lot of people can't even afford to travel, or when you're disabled particularly, you can't. And a lot of other services were already being shut down within that anyway.
Have we not kind of gone through a bit of a care revolution, though, in terms of some of the sort of care that's administered? Some people would say we've had a similar revelations in terms of teaching, although I'm not sure that that's going very well. With, for example, the ideas of Montessori, more practical, hands-on methods of teaching, perhaps.
Some of the things are really, really good, but they're not given with common sense. For example, they gave the disabled rights to choose their own food, but when they're buying junk food week after week and getting weight problems, surely intervention should be allowed. But the government agencies that work in stick by that, well, they're allowed to choose scenario. And then you realise it's not such a great thing, is it? You know, there's little tweaks here and there that no one will touch because suddenly it's been set in cast iron. And whistleblowing is not something that goes down well with any of these agencies. Usually any staff that complain or put forward serious issues end up being put on suspension for months and months without no pay, and ultimately lose positions XYZ and possibilities for future careers. So you don't hear a lot about the more severe consequences of things, unless perchance you hear the odd one in the newspaper.
You don't strike me as being the average person that gets involved in politics, with at least the mainstream parties. Why did you get involved with UKIP? I mean, you're an NHS carer, you know, a regular member of society. Most people that get involved in politics seem to, I don't know, they seem to frankly be less caring. I know there are exceptions. I know there are. Of course there are. But what was it that pushed you to get involved, and why did you get involved with UKIP out of interest?
Well, whilst I was learning what I was on the NHS Trust, I'd actually moved into a rural area for the first time. I was living amongst some very nice, intelligent, good people. An awful lot were police or retired police and upwards, you know. And I was telling them what I was learning, and they kept saying, you should go in politics, you should go in politics. But I've never in my life voted Conservative nor Labour, because never in my life have I trusted or believed in them. Because I've watched year after year the failures to keep promises to people. And I've watched year after year things getting worse. And being at the bottom as a public paid carer, I feel it and see it first. I've been fighting for the first 14 years as my part as a carer for actually obtaining my disabled daughter's benefits.
Your disabled daughter's
benefits.
Benefits.
She's full disabled, but they were withheld from us for 14 years. So when you're dealing with your own in-house issues, you don't tend to look too closely at the world and politics. And I must admit, I knew the feeling that I felt was wrong. I knew through the government agencies that were working for me and on my behalf that weren't getting anywhere were obviously being stonewalled. And obviously I did pay attention to what was going on socially around me. I lived in Dagenham at the time. And I suppose, no, I think when I actually looked up getting into politics, when I joined UKIP, I can tell you the exact day, it was in March 27th, 2009, and I was looking at, there was a big uproar in Westminster about all them expenses and things. Now, I'd already seen headlines of MPs and things breaking the laws, but to see them sucking up people's taxes when people like myself were living on less than £5 a day and at food banks, it was just incredible. So
I kind of suspected that was the deal, that you really did get involved because of personal experience.
Well, yeah, of course. I've tried to stop the closures of the disabled centres. I realised not long into it that it was already a pre-done deal. I've watched them stick up businesses on all the prime sites. They left the ones that were on airport runway danger zones, they left them alone, so the disabled could happily keep them ones. But the ones in prime locations, not one of us could stop them anywhere. There's been things that I've been...
Sorry, Debbie, what were you referring to? What was it they were closing down?
The disabled day centres.
The disabled day centres. So has that been one of the cuts as a result of austerity, or?
Well, that was way before I joined the NHS Trust, so they did that well before then.
So that was before this latest post-2008 austerity round.
That's right.
You're saying?
Yeah, it was before then.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to gauge. Is there any, for example, is there any particular government that's responsible here, or is it, if you like, a cascading problem that's been handed down by different administrations, or?
Well, the long and the short of it is, no matter what it is, they're all following the same song sheet, aren't they? Because no one seems to backtrack when something's going wrong. They follow the same. We've got to keep pushing forward with the plan, and that's the overall feeling that you get when you're dealing with them. That was definitely the feeling that we got on the NHS Trust Board, because there was one gentleman on the board that had expert business acumen. He was retired, and he gave very good, valid reasons as to why we shouldn't have investors brought in for our hospitals.
Right.
He was squeezed off the board, and we never saw him again. And they brought in American team builders that just basically worked on us for such a long time, and we were just tick boxing in the end and agreeing to everything that they put forward.
Really?
Yes, and that's also pretty scary to see, because there was no voice. It was an illusion that you were going to have one, but we didn't.
I've got a few comments coming in, and that's fantastic. Linda Fox asked Debbie about the housing she had in Dagenham. Maybe you can tell us about that, Debbie. What's going on? What happened there?
Well, my disabled daughter was born to me when I was 19, and I lived in a block of flats at the Lintons. They've now been demolished. Ironically, in 1984, quite a lot were recommended to be demolished, including the one you were talking about earlier. I couldn't get housing for my daughter. We had to do 12 years in flats. I went to sit in the council with a recording. My daughter used to scream for 3 days and 3 nights solid, and I did have other children as well. And I did a recording and took the children down there, and I played it in the waiting room with a packed lunch and ready to sit in there for the day. And me and the children, 3 children, got carted away in what was called the Black Mariah them days. But when they finally did give me a house, after an awful lot of arguing and 12 years and God knows what, 2 weeks I moved in and the ceiling fell in. It had 3-pronged plug sockets everywhere. I was in the worst crime area you can imagine. I became a victim immediately. The social setting was appalling. Yeah, so...
Where were you? Where would you describe as one of the worst areas, one of the worst areas for care in the country?
Well, at that time, that was in Dagenham, for me, in a...
Dagenham, Essex.
Yes, that's the one. I married into the area. The house and the garden I longed for the children was, as I say, very, very hard to get off. But they put me in a road where there was an extremely high crime level throughout that area, and I'm pretty certain they should have known that, you know.
And this was a problem for you particularly because you were caring, and still are, for your disabled daughter. Yeah. And it just adds more and more things into the equation for you to have to think about on a daily basis. If, for example, you're worried about, well, obviously it's going to be more difficult if you're looking after somebody to have to think about 2 people instead of just 1.
I had to move away from the only resource of help that I have with my children, because I don't have any family network. And that was obviously my mother and father-in-law, but I gave up the property and went up to move to Redditch. And whilst I was up there, I did other things like taught adult literature as a volunteer whilst I went to college and studied child psychology and so forth, while I was trying to fight for my daughter's benefits to stop them from talking down at me. And so that I had other angles to sit there and try and get them to do their jobs, basically, because that's felt like that I was always pushing someone to do their jobs, and every time they refused her, it felt like they were calling me a liar.
Why would they talk down to you?
When you're at this social level, that can happen, I'm afraid.
What do you mean, at the social level?
When you're dealing with government agencies, I've even had it said it to me, quite pronounced actually, when I was in Southend, that they don't expect to help people like me unless I was on drugs, like an addict or something. People like me were supposed to do it myself. Yeah.
We're getting comments coming in from Christopher Michael Baxter as well. Instead of helping our elderly, we're instead trapping them in places of boredom, depression, neglect, and abuse. And he also says we spend the most money trying to stave off death. We waste precious time we could have used to make life as good as it can be in our final years. While the quality of our care for the elderly is dismal, we still pay millions for it each year. Ironically, we spend the most on our deathbeds. Once an aging parent loses the ability to function on his or her own, it unfortunately becomes the child's responsibility to ensure she or he is taken care of. For many, that means putting their parent supposedly somewhere safe for their remaining days. He's obviously referring again to that story in the Telegraph.
Everything he said there is excruciatingly right. I've got a very simple solution, because I felt as who I am down here, very alienated, particularly when I have to say that I've been on benefits as well in a certain way. When I'm doing something good, I'm apparently saving the nation thousands a week minimum by looking after my own child. So why isn't it there aren't communities that are self-sufficient, that the elderly and the disabled could work together in a village type life and have some self-respect and independence, and not be a leech on the taxpayers as we are made to feel like when we're in this situation. And I'm not being
Really,
funny.
that's the feeling that you tend to get?
That's how I feel. That's how I felt. Well, when you add up that I've only ever received cash in my hand, £38,000 over the first 21 years as a carer in total, I think, no, I'm not a leech actually. But of course you do. The newspapers are always deriding people. Don't you remember back in the 80s when they were deriding young girls for getting pregnant to get houses? You know,
I do remember that.
Really 4 points, when probably, the truth be known, only 10 ever achieved that. But they'll make a big deal out of it to alienate Britons sometimes. Do you know what I mean? Away from the true issues that are going on. And yeah, why couldn't we have options of independence where we don't feel like we're a leech on society? In actual fact, I mean, I would have liked to have added value. I've seen disabled making and creating beautiful things. I've seen the elderly can teach so much. They want to keep going after retirement. We've all got a value in life, you know, and by definition alone, as a carer, a single carer, and if I lived in that society, I'd be one of them caring for the elderly. There'd be one of them supporting me. It would, you know, in an ideal world, obviously, and as long as there was an ability to ensure that everyone was on that same page who lived in that environment, wouldn't that be more useful?
You would think so, wouldn't you?
I know.
You would think so. Why were your benefits withheld for 14 years?
Laura's. Apparently a doctor filled the form in wrong when we got to it. It was CLAC, which was an abbreviation for the legal team of CAB in Southend that actually got a court case going.
Right.
And the minute we didn't actually even go in the door, they knew full well. They rode over and said, "Oh no, there's been a mistake."
A court case over what?
Over the fact that they weren't giving her benefits.
Right.
It's not a court case, but
do you mind my asking, Debbie, what's the matter with your daughter?
She's got a mental age of child. It's permanent. I believe at the time, I had no idea why she was born disabled. But I also believe at one point while she was very young, she had some sort of fit or seizure because her eyes kind of disappeared. She ended up later on having to have an operation in Moorfields to have the muscles cut so that we could see the colour of them again, you know.
Right.
My daughters have a hereditary disease. Abbreviation is OC, but it's basically liver failure during pregnancy, and that was not recognised or diagnosed when I had my children.
Okay.
And I also believe there's other things as well, as I say, but yeah, she was very, very severely autistic, behavioural issues, incontinence.
What's her name, Debbie?
Laura.
Laura. And how old is she now?
32.
Okay, so you've been a personal carer for 32 years. Quite aside from whatever other qualifications you've got.
Mm-hmm.
So you know the system quite well. And so your daughter was quite severely handicapped, and you had your benefits kept back for 14 years.
Yeah, she did, and that not just her benefits, but that included her access to any of her and our rights to housing and so forth.
Right.
Right, like for example, right today, my car's not parked in a suitable, safe area because I don't have a drive. Had she been given her benefits at the appropriate age, which should have been about 5, I think, we would have been allocated a home with a drive and things that, you know, the little things that would have been in place before she turned 16, because when you hit 16 as a disabled person, all the help dries up, you go to a different social services team and the whole world changes.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why it changes, because the setup was supposed to be in place before that disabled person reached 16, and we didn't get the proper social housing that Laura needed until she was 26.
Until she was 26?
Yeah, that was the first time we got the right proper social setting and social housing.
And so you're saying that that's somewhere that the person can navigate as easily as is possible, and that, for example, in this case, there's easy access via a car.
Well, when you've got carers coming into your home to look after her and you're living in a rural location, if you're parked in such a way that you're going to cause an accident, and which inevitably that happens in villages, you tend to want to avoid that. But the new legislation that's been brought in, as you know, the red tape world that's now commencing very rapidly over the past 20 years, now stops a lot of the changes that would have easily gone in place too. So it's all about keep battling on with more stranglehold red tape that kind of prevents an awful lot of people accessing what they're entitled to, because they make it harder and harder and harder. Okay,
so your experiences, both personal and professional, and at work and socially, why did they prompt you to join UKIP out of interest, as opposed to, say, the Lib Dems or any of the other parties, maybe the Greens? I don't know.
It was the only one that was stating categorically that we needed to be out of the EU.
Why does that help anything?
Well, number one, no one asked us if we wanted to get in there, did they?
Okay, all right. So this is a slightly different issue then. This is more an issue of, well, sovereignty, perhaps, or democracy.
But you've got to remember, since they've signed up, bit by bit, all the rules and things that they've put in place, we've lost the greatest part of what was British. I've heard the question time and time again, and people seem to dry up and don't answer, but look at our nursing staff back in the 70s. They were vocational, they were trained and they were vocational, so were our teachers. There was a feeling of nationalism and a thing that we felt within this nation. We were helping make the world better as well. The things that we had were going to go on to everyone else. And you can feel and you know full well the change, and that clearly started when Mrs. Thatcher started selling off the nation's assets that belong to the people, because in my mind that was an illegal action, particularly when they were not replaced. So, and sorry, but I felt that all of that's been very, very wrong and detrimental to the people and the taxpayers and the people that paid and built this system up for us. And it was putting trust of the governments, and I feel that, as I say, I've never voted for either the party. I feel they've betrayed that trust. And I'm afraid the Liberal Dems, you're saying, well, they want to be part of the EU. That's part of the problem. So clearly I didn't choose them. You know full well over the years, I've seen it. I never was part of politics, but I've seen how badly they've vilified any national party as well. So clearly you couldn't use that word because that's been turned into a dirty word. But UKIP seemed to be a nice, clean angle, which I thought was going to wake people up to the realistic things of what's really going on now. But I don't know.
We've had a few more comments. I'm going to try and be good on the comments today, Debbie, because I wasn't on Tuesday. And it's fantastic to be able to, have this instant feedback from folks. Alan Ashwood, Deb is making perfect common sense, a feature lacking in the system. Linda Fox, a friend of mine in the 80s, was told by the council to go out and get herself pregnant as she was right at the bottom of the housing ladder. She was waiting to get married. The area was Tower Hamlets. Christopher Michael Baxter again, we need to go in the same direction of retirement villages like they have in third world countries that include their own hospitals, medical units and eating place that the elderly can live in their own homes in purpose-built villages. And Alan Ashwood, she's correct. Our so-called membership of the EU is totally illegal. So, okay. So, Debbie, with that, I know that this is it's a bit of a labyrinthian debate, but how much of the problems that we face, for example, in our social services now, with the NHS, how much is that as a result of our own poor management at home, and how much of it is as a result of policy that has been passed down from on high in Brussels, would you say?
Well, there's accountability on both sides, isn't there, I believe, personally, that all of our historical governments have been kind of puppets of what they were supposed to be doing. They've been following a plan. I think some of them did it with all good intentions or maybe a bit blindly to get to leadership, but once they become Prime Minister, I think they became privy to what was going on.
So hold on a sec. You're getting into conspiratory territory here.
Stay away from that.
Well, is this the kind of like the Bilderberg line, which I used earlier? So, hey, hands up. Is that what the kind of thing you're talking about? A plutocracy. Hey, that's what the show believes, frankly.
But follow the money. But there's also other secret societies, isn't there? There's the Masons that you also mentioned. So I don't believe that there should be any connection.
I didn't, but I might have done.
No, I would anyway. I just don't believe that there's any such thing as a good secret, really, unless it's your birthday or Christmas. I think we're in a world where there's much more transparency anyway, because look at the way we all can communicate, the way we can film things live on our phones and so forth. So secret societies have really got no place in the modern day world if we're all going to have a fair chance at things.
Nor secret accounts, Brussels. Secret accounts, pretty crap. Yeah, we could do with having some accountability. Okay, so you're saying that the kind of folks that, if you like, are ruining Europe, it seems to me, and ruining the UK, they're not necessarily homegrown terrorists. They could be foreign, but it doesn't really matter. They are basically on they're singing from the same hymn sheet. They're not really working for the electorates that maybe get a chance in some cases, but they're not too technocratic to vote for them. And so you're saying that maybe some folks are, they're basically agents for the same people. Whether, but I don't want to put words into your mouth here. I want to hear what you have to say about this, and also where you kind of come by this kind of information.
I want to come exactly back to what you're saying about social services, because obviously when we joined Common Market, I believe that was the beginning of the change of times in this country, but I was still a child then. But obviously I was very young, encountering social services via law at the age of 19, and the social workers that I encountered then were fantastic. They went above and beyond the call of duty. They used to walk around with books that had instant access to charities instead of sending you off on this wild goose chase of 5 or 6 phone numbers to get to the last one and find out they don't do it anymore, which can be quite heartbreaking, especially when you're begging for help. Back them days, it was properly set up. They really did seem to care. And they were able to do more, but then suddenly all these new improved laws cut back that ability, and then we seem to turn into this insurance world where suddenly everyone's too scared to say anything in case they were held accountable for that too. And as I said, the secrecy within the childcare became even more so, claiming it was to cover the child's rights, but it seemed to me to cover their the things that they were doing wrong. And you're seeing that as well when you hear about some of the grooming gangs. No matter who is responsible, when those children are in government care, that's a failure, isn't it? A failure to meter out care, and,
that's right.
And so forth, you know. So that those sort of things would never have happened back then, I would have thought. But then even saying that...
Back when, Debbie, sorry?
Well, back in the 70s and 80s. But as I was saying, I've got to even bite my tongue on that, because there are always the exceptions to the rule. We're seeing on the news about Jersey. I keep my eye on everything.
Yeah, so that's right. Outgarin was in the news again this week.
But yeah, no, but you can feel and you can see. And then, of course, with the new policies of putting agencies in instead of hiring staff directly yet again, has introduced a really high layer cake of expense to the taxpayer, but those that are receiving the service, and indeed those giving the service, don't get any more money and they get less of a service. Yet again, we're seeing that people are getting visitors to come in their homes who need home care for 10 minutes. I mean, I'm sorry, I take 10 minutes to wake up and have a cup of tea in the morning. What are you supposed to achieve there for someone who's been waiting to see someone all day? That would never have happened in the 80s when I was a carer then, and it's been so slowly developing to the point we are now.
You say that. One thing that was going on.
District nurses, you know.
Pardon?
District nurses, where are they? You know, all the things that were there once upon a time. The fact that we used to have doctors that stayed throughout the family and knew your history. We've turned into that slippery, let's not hold them to account system when no one gets to know you. And the testing system in this nation is really poor, ironically, as is any of the, you know, it's very surprising, some of the things I've learned.
We've got a few other comments here. Alan Ashwood. Now you got it, Ollie. Bilderbergs do run the whole thing, no theory. Linda Fox, the government are all actors playing to the puppet master's tune. Alan Ashwood again, cover their asses. Corruption is very deep-rooted. Richard Markham, government is still Bilderberg. That's why everything is so slow. And Alan Ashwood, compassion and decency has been replaced by corruption, greed, and fear. This is basically, people are talking about a secret government here, deep state. That's really the kind of deep state that a lot of people would say that Trump is trying to tackle in the United States, and that the EU is pure and simple an extension of that. And indeed, we know that Jacques Delors and Jean-Claude Trichet, first president of the EC Bank, and Delors, you know, big founder of the whole damn thing, both said this was a stepping stone towards global government, the EU, and were boasting about the EU Bilderberg conferences and stuff like that, saying how Bilderberg had been instrumental in setting the whole thing up. So a lot of this stuff is on public record, but I'm just kind of assuming that most of your folks that you would talk to, they just would dismiss this. They just wouldn't be able to accept that there's some kind of a establishment level cover up going on.
You'll be surprised when you're talking to people in small pieces and in a manner of where it actually applies to their own life. I'm fully aware, 100%, that, and so is the general public really, if they thought about it, they can't hit the lower level of society anymore. We're reading about people that are forced to go back to work, that are sick and they're dying. But I don't think that you can sacrifice the lower levels anymore. What people are failing to wake up to are the new targets, the middle classes. And you've got to start introducing some of the changes of the law that the EU have already put through. Your bank account's not safe if it comes for a bail-in one day, you know.
That's right. They found that out in Cyprus, didn't they?
Yeah.
And taxpayers with bailouts, as opposed to the bail-in template, it was called, by the EU Treasury guy. And then the US under Obama said, we might adopt that template idea too. We'll just keep it, behind the sofa for now. They, oh blimey, what do they do? I forgot. Oh yeah, bail-ins. Yeah, just last week, this week, in the last couple of weeks, we've had now 3 bail-ins. There was another bail-in, bailout yesterday. What is it? That oldest bank in Italy or something got 4.9 billion euros, and they apparently have had about 17 billion euros now, that bank, from taxpayer money. And there were another 2 banks that got about 17 billion euros worth of bailout last week.
Ask yourself how they
it's just a joke. But these aren't the investors that are paying for their failed take on capitalism. It's not them that are failing because they screwed it up. It's people that aren't even customers at the bank that are being asked to pay and bail them out. That's fascism. That is actually fascism. Look it up. Look it up in your dictionary. Tell me if that isn't fascism with a small f. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Okay, we got some more.
Like their labels. I just call it pure evil. I don't want to belong to a club. I want to be part of the human race, and what they're doing is pure evil to people.
Alan Ashwood says 3 unions make up the NWO, the New World Order. I'd like to hear more of what you mean on that, Alan. 3 unions. I don't know quite where you're getting at there. Christopher Michael Baxter, Codswallop. The promise of the European Union is supposed to be peace, democracy, and prosperity. This promise was also supposed to be the basis of its relationships with countries around the globe. He's taking that. There seems to be a clear link between the trust that Europeans have in the common project and the Union delivering on these promises, particularly when citizens feel that the promise of prosperity is no longer delivered. They lose trust in the EU. We've seen time and time again that corruption has been an obstacle to these promises being kept. Linda, for great comment. Linda Fox, the middle classes will be the next in their sights as the poorer in their sights, the poorer levels of society have no money left. And indeed, Linda, I tell you, the middle classes have been. I would precursor that middle classes. The jobs creating middle classes have just been, not just in the UK, but in the US, or the mama pop stores replaced by the Walmarts or what have you, which in turn are beginning to close now because people are, buying online or what have you. So there's an irony for you. But we're losing the community, and we're also losing the job creating middle class. And so, hey, unless you want to get a job flipping burgers at McDonald's until they can replace you with a robot, which they are doing now as a result of the minimum wage So another lot of politics gone awry. Yeah, middle class is absolutely buggered. Bank bail-ins are in the UK, says Alan Ashworth, since January 2016. Well, yeah, actually, you know, also bank bail-ins is one thing, QE is another, because printing money is basically just another tax on the cash in everybody's wallet. Is getting squeezed with every time that you add more cash into the circulation. Unless you do it on every economy around the world at the same time. But it's been happening mainly in the West, hasn't it? We seem to be racing to print money. Thanks, Alan Ashwood. Linda Fox, bail-in or bail-outs, they are different. Bail-ins will take the customer's money directly from their accounts. Yes, that is correct. That is correct. In the case of Cyprus, I understand that as I remember it, the local government, the elected folks, their vote on the matter was disallowed. The EU took the matter in its own hands, strong-armed the Cypriot government, who basically had to put up with whatever measures were handed down from on high. And they, I think, specified that people with more than something like 100,000 euros in their depositor accounts would be fleeced and have money taken away towards the bail-in. If you had less than 100,000 euro in that template, as the finance guy called it. But yeah, thanks, Linda. Alan, whereas a bailout is when it comes from the taxpayer. And so if it's coming from the taxpayer, it is coming from people that don't even have an account at the bank. And so you could argue, which is worse? Well, I mean, either way, you put money into a bank, you don't expect that it's then going to be somehow invested in junk bonds that are given AAA status by, hey, some wonderful, fantastic, cracking like a polling company type quality company, who so you basically they gamble your money because they got rid of Glass-Steagall and all that, yeah, so they can take your depositors' money and they can invest it on the investment side, lose it, and then we're really, really sorry about that, or as a taxpayer, you know what, I didn't even know that bank existed, and you nonetheless are charging me however much to bail them out, and incredible. So either way, it's theft. It's theft either way. Yeah, Alan Ashwood. He asked, "Need my memes?" I didn't. I'm lost. Linda Fox. The banks took up to 60% of customers' money in Cyprus. Blimey. Alan Ashwood is now 70,000. Okay, 70,000, not that 100,000 threshold, but they bypassed it at that time. Okay, all right. Christopher Michael Baxter, Wikipedia. The New World Order, commonly abbreviated NWO, in logo stylized as. Okay, you need to read that. Was a professional wrestling stable that originally consisted of Hollywood Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott and Big Daddy. Yeah, maybe he was pre that. I don't know. Okay, fantastic. Showing our age. Christopher Baxter. Baxter is getting on. I know that. Oh, yeah. Okay. Debbie, we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to extend this show because I'm not going to extend this show. I'm just going to have the show run its course because, we had a few problems at the top of the show. Some of you may have noticed. Do apologize for that. Debbie, your life is it sounds as though it's not been entirely easy. Is it not? How can your life and the life of professional carers around the UK be improved? I mean, it sounds like a loaded question, but what are your genuine thoughts?
Well, personally, knowing how our nation was run, and
The
personally,
life of your daughter as well, by the way. Sorry, carry on.
you've got to remember, I'm going to leave this world before her, and I don't want to leave it the way it is. Our nation is worldwide known for being a good, caring nation. We have more charity adverts going than any before. People get ripped off left, right, and centre because charity doesn't mean charity anymore either. I would love to see that set right back to what it really meant. But that is the thing, isn't it? Let the nation shine again like it was, full of the vocational people that we did train, like we did have decent doctors and nurses in hospitals, but the government refused to give them the pay rises whilst we had them, and we lost them. I think we've got to recognise that we've got to remove the layer cakes of charges on the tax people, and it's not going to cost us a fraction to run these services of what they're charging there anyway, and it'd be back in our hands. I believe 100% in this nation that we were a shining example of how to be, and that's not just as a way of a carer. I'm surrounded by good people of all political parties. Politics isn't what this is about. This is about people worldwide for me. I felt an awful lot of people came to this country because they would love to learn about it and elevate it in their nations. But I don't see too much of that going on at the moment. And well, I suppose before I pop my corks, I'd love to see that turned.
Okay, there's a few issues there, and they're all huge. First of all, you're actually talking about something very, very topical this week, that public sector pay cap. Linda Fox again. We can then pay for doctors, nurses, and care staff direct without agency staff creaming off their cut.
It's not the agency staff, it's the agencies that have been set up by the old boy network.
The Quangos.
You got it. You know exactly what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I saw developing in the NHS. And it's throughout the entire government system. I'm not being funny. Wasn't local council supposed to manage stocks and hire and fire staff and take responsibilities? Well, they sold off their jobs the minute they bought off agencies. So technically, we're paying them for nothing. But, you know, and we're paying thrice as much, but the actual workers are not getting a massive crime. The carers of my daughter's agency.
The money, you're saying the money is basically going to
agencies.
Basically, folks that are buying the NHS.
Yes.
And the people that actually work in it and the patients are being shortchanged as a result. The money is now going. How has that happened? We were under the impression that the NHS was in good hands. How much would you say now it is a privatized business as opposed to a national institution?
Well, you look at all the adverts on television, even on Facebook, you see them. There's adverts telling you if you're born before 1968, jump the queues. The pressure into privatisation is the creation of overload in this nation and forcing it to break anyway, isn't it? You can see it from cause and effect. It's very simple. I mean, I'm not being funny. 10 years ago, a doctor would not give you a result test over the phone, certainly wouldn't give you a prescription. They do now. You have to book in advance weeks and weeks. And why is it people, good hard-working people who pay their national insurance stamp, have to pay for their prescriptions? Sorry, but they're paying for them, aren't they? I don't understand how that was even taken away from people. That was part of the beauty of the original setup. It was for the workers. And yet they were the first one they took it away from.
Is it not also fair to say, I mean, we've got to find money from somewhere, that now the NHS has such a broad remit that remit needs to become, I don't know, maybe a bit more pragmatic. Maybe we can't cover everything. We have to decide what we are going to cover. How do we pay for it?
Well, as I say, you said it yourself, take out the quangos for a start. It would be quite slow, I should imagine, to start with, because you'd have to reinvest yet again in education from the start. But I think the common sense thing to do would be bring up contracts that if people were educated through the system, that they would have to work, say, 15, 20 years within the system before they emigrated to somewhere else if that's what they wanted to do. But there's got to be some protection, and also there's got to be prime money paid and not withheld for what you're getting, because we were getting the best. And
prime money held.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Let me just get a couple of comments here. Alan Ashwood, Branson will ultimately own the NHS.
Buying into it big, isn't it? We all know that. And he owns things worldwide. He's not a person that's just buying into Britain. He's all over the world. He's not, he's not doing this because he's British and he wants to save Britain for us. He's an international businessman. He doesn't even live here, does he? From what I understand,
he lives on Nectar Island. I understand that. I understand he's got lots of boat people, on his beaches, and he's trying to ski round them with the former president of the United States, trying to teach him to kite surf around the boat people that he's invited. Christopher Michael Baxter. Olly, don't forget the PFIs and interest our hospitals are paying to keep shareholders happy at the expense of the taxpayers' public. That sounds a bit like the Federal Reserve, where you're paying interest, Americans, and it's not dissimilar with the Bank of England for a lot of fat cats to make money, deciding to lend to the country and then charging. In the case of the Federal Reserve, an entirely private company that is basically saying, "Hey, we'll lend you some money. We're going to charge you the interest." They conjured the money out of thin air, literally. It's kind of a similar deal, I guess. Min Ellen Davis, just Debbie, one sec, just go through these because it's wonderful that we're getting this feedback. No more foreign aid, says Min Ellen Davis. Repatriate all non-contributing migrants. Men with 4 wives, 25 kids, etc. We cannot sustain this type care. The NHS is not there for people that have paid into it. Every hospital is full of aliens. Get us out of the EU now. Walk away. Pay no more money. We're not obliged to pay this money. Well, it has to be said, there's a lot of health tourism as well. Okay. Some pretty controversial points that need to be made. How much of our problem, Debbie, is that we have been so politically correct, and we have, I mean, it's wonderful to try and help folks elsewhere, and it would be great if we stopped bombing, or allowing the war profiteers to get away with bombing in our names. Tony Blair is getting a hard week. That's good to see. But aside from that, we've kind of reached out, have we not, Debbie? But you mentioned that word earlier, charity. I was brought up to believe charity begins at home, purely for the simple reason that if you don't look after yourself, you're no good to anybody else. Have we kind of stretched this whole charitable business, and it's actually not charity now? I mean, charities, you pay into a charity these days, and apparently the guy that, the CEO or whatever's creaming off a couple of $100,000 as a salary. It doesn't sound very charitable to me. When these positions are advertised in the job pages of the Media Guardian, it just what are we? Debbie, I'm just having a rant. Do you fancy a rant?
I don't blame you. I know of people that have been rewarded for doing bad things that end up at top of charities. It's not something I can discuss very openly, but obviously I'm aware these things happen. And you were saying about how do you substantiate prime money. I can only do it in my direct little way. I know it goes on elsewhere, but they were paying agencies over £14-15 an hour, and the staff that came to look after my daughter were on less than £5.50 an hour at that time. So that's how they cream off. That's how they charge a taxpayer much more money than they need. Very simple. And they're doing it in literally every sector of it. But the taxpayer is usually paying 3 times as much as it should because they've created these quangos. So yeah, you rant away. I'll join. But yes, the charity, 100%. Look at how much they spend on the adverts on television. Surely that should be money going to people who need £2 to change their lives when they're spending hundreds of thousands on television on repeated adverts aimed at women in children time, prime time as well. They're very clever where they locate these charitable adverts. And you know and I know that very little actually gets through to the real people that need it.
Okay, how are we going to change this?
Oh, let's wash our hands of all the dirty deals and actually make things mean what they used to. Give back the Englishman's word is his bond. Put some decency and honour back into this nation. Freedom comes with accountability. Let's start adding that.
Beautiful. I go along with that. Go along with all that. I think that getting out of the EU is going to help. I really do.
There's no accountability there, so definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And also because even if, let's just say, for just a fleeting moment that we got to vote for half of these folks in the EU, even if we did, the fact is that politics that is further away is harder to control. Whether it's Scotland, looking at Westminster, although they've got a lot more control over Westminster than the English do, or whether it's the French looking at Brussels or whatever. It's harder if the political centre is further away. If it's closer, like local politics, is much easier to control. And you must know that, having run as a councillor, Debbie, that local politics is much easier to hold accountable, and that's a good reason to keep politics local. No,
you think so, but unfortunately, I can honestly say one of the reasons I didn't want to get into politics is because you see too many people in it for profit reasons and not to actually represent people. I would love to see, again, that word vocational put in, and that people are interviewed, and that business is separated from, obviously, politicians, because if this has been a source of business, what they've done with taxpayers' money, they've all failed tremendously. They haven't even bothered to run the taxpayers' side as equally as they do, for example, someone like Direct Line. As you say, if you haven't paid into the system, Direct Line tells you to sling your hook. So there's some really, obvious things that could easily be addressed there and sorted out too. But no, it does start, I'm afraid, sometimes as low down as parish councils, because they network there, they know what property to buy, to develop, and that's just rurally, and they're usually in it for other business interests, to have big lorry firms driving through small villages and so forth and so forth. So actually, I do believe it needs cleaning up from the bottom to the top. Sorry.
Debbie, we've run out of time. Thank you very, very much. I want to just say from Alan Ashwood, Debbie, you're brilliant, more controlled than me. Beverly Taylor King says the most damage done to the NHS was done in 1997 to 2010. It will take many years to re-establish the NHS. Linda Fox, brilliant. Well done, Debbie. Not a rant in sight. Alan Ashford, Bilderberg, banks, corporations, government. Debbie, will you come back on, please?
Yeah, I'd love to.
I do apologise for the top of the show. Total chaos. Gonna get this tech right. It's... Blimey. Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie Shaw. God bless you. Really, really appreciate... Quite worrying what you say, to be honest with you. But I tell you, it's we've got to do this. We've got to sort this out. We've got to, as much as we possibly can. I don't know. People don't like this theme tune. They don't like it. I like it. bless you. Ciao, ciao, folks. Yeah.